All right, we're back. Our live stream, for some reason, is not on. Let me check on YouTube. Right, it should be. Okay, maybe we should actually restart this presentation. Ross, I don't know what about you.
Sure, look,
Since,
no trouble. Absolutely. If we can do it again and get it better for recording,
yeah,
absolutely.
okay.
No trouble.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the second presentation in the series, part two, the parallels between the French Revolution and end time events. This is a live recording, so please bear with us. We already have some technical issues, but we are back here. We're back on YouTube as well. And we're going to go through this presentation. The next parallels that we have 12 parallels. So today we're going to cover 3 of them, 4, 5, and 6, which you're going to see in a few minutes. A certain wise man remarked that one secret of being a successful politician is to be able to accurately predict what would happen in a year's time, and then be able to explain why, when the time came, his prediction did not eventuate. This is actually, as you probably already know, maybe you were one of them, the predicament in which the least to the greatest of those who are not the children of God find themselves. So if you do not believe in the Bible, if you do not believe in God, if you do not believe that actually the Bible has been telling us for thousands of years what is going to happen today, what is going to happen in the future, well, this group of people, I pity them. Because the future is gray, dark, uncertain, fear inspiring, unknown for this group of people. But this is not supposed to be like this. There is hope. There is a chance, friend, for the humble, God-fearing child of the Most High who, according to God's instruction, searches the scriptures to know what is coming upon the world. But you, brethren, says the Bible, are not in darkness, so that this day should overtake you as a thief. This is actually a Bible verse which has never been, in my belief, more actual than today. You are not supposed to be in darkness. What is happening in the world today should not overtake you as a thief. Because Paul continues saying that you are all sons of light and sons of the day. We are not of the night, not of darkness. Therefore, let us not sleep as others do, but let us watch and be sober. So this is what we're trying to do here. We're trying to be the watchman that is going to try to wake as many people as possible. That was a Bible verse from 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 4 and to 6. 2 Peter chapter 1, verse 19 is telling us that, and so we have the prophetic word confirmed, which you do well to heed as a light that shineth in a dark place, until the day dawns and the morning star rises in your heart. So this is the light, friends, that we would like and we would love to bring to you, to your path, to wherever you are, into this darkness which is covering the world today. Thousands and millions of people, yes, billions of people, are being shrouded in this darkness and are feeling this uncertainty about the future, about their life, about their safety. Many people, they have nowhere to go. Many people, thousands and millions, they are coerced. They're being manipulated to receive an agenda, to receive a solution, which at the end is going to be not just detrimental to them, but fatal. There are so many opinions today in the world, and although so many subscribes to different of their personal reason opinion, the prophecies of the Bible are not difficult to understand. The Word of God describes them as being a light which is shining in a dark place, dispelling that which is in the darkness ahead, which is mysterious and uncertain. The very wording of Scripture indicates that there is no mystery about these things and signs. True, the prophecies are written in a code language where symbols are used to identify righteous and evil forces. This is the way that God decided to write the prophecies, to inspire the prophecies in the Bible, and has been employed in order to deprive the dedicated enemies of the gospel of information which would assist them in their warfare against the truth. To his enlightened ones, to those that are willing to follow the light, God supplies the key to the code together with the wonderful guidance of the great and marvelous teacher, the Holy Spirit. So no one needs to be the least in doubt or uncertain as to what these messages mean to them. In this second part, in this presentation, Ross Patterson and I would like to reveal some of the keys to the understanding of what is happening in the world today, seen through the glasses of Bible prophecy. So this is not our personal opinion. We are going to do our very best to explain, to present the Bible as it is and link it to the present and to the future. So it is our hope that if you are one of those that sees the future as a great, dark, uncertain, fear-inspiring, and unknown, that you will decide to turn into a humble, God-fearing child of the Most High, who, according to God's instruction, searches the Scriptures to know what is coming upon the world, and not just to know, but to do what is expected from you. So let's start our journey today and dive into the next parallels between the French Revolution and the latter day events. The next parallel that we're going to cover today is number 4, which we see here on the screen. The minority who received the gospel were driven out in prison or slain. We read that from a very well-known historian, J. Wiley, and a very interesting and important book for our time, The Great Controversy. the link that we would like to show today is that the remnant will receive the wrath of the dragon and they will be driven out, imprisoned, or slain. So the question that we are going to cover is that what is the past, present, and future application? Do we just read history because it's interesting to know what happened in the past? Or does it have any value for us? So welcome back, Ross. Welcome back to you from New Zealand.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Ross, the question which is going to take us through this presentation is that, as I just mentioned, what is the past, present, and future application? So if we look at the parallel number 4, where we learn from the history that the minority who received the gospel were driven out, imprisoned, or slain, do we find today any link to the present day world and the future? So let's just delve a little bit on the present application. How would you see the world from your perspective in terms of this parallel?
Yes, well, we see at the present time trouble around the world. For example, I was watching a video today. A lady in Europe was in communication with a Christian family in Afghanistan, and she was relating how fearful they were because with the Taliban taking over the country, they're having a religious cleansing. Missionaries are being executed, Christian families are being executed or driven out. They have a small chance to get to the airport, to get out, and we know there's crowds of people at the airports trying to get out. It's horrific. So we see a little microcosm, a little reenactment of that happening right today. Now we know from prophecy, the day will come, Jesus said, when you'll be hated of all nations for my name's sake. So what we see happening on a little scale in Afghanistan and in other places, persecution on Christians, this is going to become global. Now, when I say Christians, I'm talking about people that are following the Bible very accurately, shall we say. We're not talking about what is called Christianity. We're talking about people that are faithful and true to the Word of God, to the Bible, to Jesus, and to His commandments. We're going to see global persecution on those people, as we see happening today in Afghanistan, for example, and places like that around the world. This is going to become a global phenomenon again.
Now, there is a lot of information, a lot of historical information, as you know, Russ, and as probably many of our viewers already know that. So we're not going to cover in this presentation the full picture because there is a lot of information in regards to the history prior to the French Revolution, the history within the French Revolution, step by step. But what is important for this presentation is, as we're going to go through these 12 parallels, is to find the application for us today. What is important for us today? Can we learn something from history? Can we learn something from the French Revolution? Does it have any importance, any value for us today? And did the French Revolution have any impact, not just on the society as such and the world and Europe especially, but also did the French Revolution start any movements which we're going to cover shortly in this presentation. So our apologies that we started a little bit late. We are actually doing the recording. We didn't realize that we were actually not streaming, but here we are back again. Now, an inspired writer, based on reliable historical data, describes what happened, just to give some at least historical, spiritual, factual background, describe what happened, the mindset prior, and the socio-economic and political atmosphere during and prior to the French Revolution. So, Ross, would you like to read and comment, if you will, this quotation for us?
Yes, certainly. Yes, this is from a very good book, very well-known book, The Great Controversy, which is a great compilation of history and puts it in a wonderful, clear, logical sequence. And this is talking about conditions in France just prior to the French Revolution, the sort of conditions that led to the French Revolution. It says, the church in the desert, the few descendants of the ancient Christians that still lingered in France in the 18th century, we're talking the 1700s here, hiding away in the mountains of the south, still cherished the faith of their fathers. As they ventured to meet by night on mountainside or lonely moor, they were chased by dragoons and dragged away to lifelong slavery in the galleys. The purest, the most refined, and the most intelligent of the French were chained in horrible torture amidst robbers and assassins. Others, more mercifully dealt with, were shot down in cold blood. As unarmed and helpless, they fell upon their knees in prayer. Hundreds of aged men, defenceless women, and innocent children were left dead upon the earth at their place of meeting. In traversing the mountainside or forest, where they had been accustomed to assemble, it was not unusual to find at every 4 paces dead bodies dotting the sward and corpses hanging suspended from the trees. Their country, laid waste with the sword, the axe, the faggot, was converted into a vast, gloomy wilderness. And get this, these atrocities were not committed during the Dark Ages, but in that brilliant era when science was cultivated and letters flourished, when the divines of the court and the capital were learned and eloquent men who greatly affected the graces of meekness and charity. That's from page 271 of The Great Controversy. That's a very graphic description of a very terrible time. We're talking about the time when the Industrial Revolution was in full swing, where there was a renaissance going on. The world was becoming, in many places, a better place to live. But here in France, the country where the Reformation had been rejected, when the Reformation tried to get into France, it was snuffed out. It was killed off. The Saint Bartholomew Day massacre killed the Protestants in France, and in Paris particularly. And what we just described was the ongoing persecution of faithful Christian people who did not adhere to the medieval religion, but were holding to that ancient faith, the genuine Christian faith that had been handed down for centuries. Very simple, primitive godliness that dated back to the early apostolic times, not the medieval church. And these people were treated horrifically, as you see, the human rights abuses against these faithful Christians, the Huguenots, the Albigenses, and that was just horrific. And that's the environment that the Church of Rome had fostered and encouraged in France. And this is what led to the abuses of the French Revolution, because the way the church dealt with what they considered heretics, because they did not adhere to the Roman faith, I guess it was educating the French people. This is how you deal with problems, as they would see it. And so, of course, when the French Revolution came along, they just continued these horrible, horrific human rights abuses. And as we know in the Revolution, there were just thousands of people that were just decapitated with the guillotines. The abuses of the Catholic Church in this time set the stage for the abuses of the French Revolution when it came.
So the history is actually telling us, as you just mentioned, that the environment has already been prepared over hundreds of years due to the mindset that has been enforced by the papacy during the Dark Ages. So the French
Yeah.
Revolution is more or less a consequence of that environment, that atmosphere, and that mindset. This is what we see in the French Revolution.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Now, we know that there is a lot of history, and as I mentioned, we're not going to cover the history written about this terrible time, which is also called the Reign of Terror. So, if you want to really learn about how terror actually really started
Mm.
in Europe, and has been not just politicized but enforced by law, read about the French Revolution. Now, I have this paper which was written by the Dutch theologian Jan Verman back in 2007. So anyone interested can go on online and actually can find this paper. Is free, has been written and can be found at Andrews University. This is about the French Revolution. It's a paper about what happened prior to the French Revolution. It's not just from an LNG wide perspective, but also from other writers, historians, even critics about what happened during prior and during the French Revolution. Of course, the let's say the focus is on the spiritual side, but also on the political and religious part of the French Revolution. Right. Well, what is important for us in this presentation is also to keep focus on these parallels, because the parallel number 4, which we just mentioned, it's about, is this something that is going to be found today? Is this something which is going to happen today in the world? Is this something which is going to affect the future as well, and not just from a Christian perspective? So, do we find today any links, any relation? And you just mentioned a little bit, Ross, but let me put on the screen. This is a website, Aid to Church in Need. Actually, as far as I understand it, this is a Catholic organization, but nevertheless, they're actually doing some research showing the persecution of Christians in the world today. And some of their research they are basing on one of the largest research institutes in the world, Pew Research. And as you see here on the screen, 340 million Christians suffer harassment or persecution. That's 1 out of 8 every Christian suffer a severe form of persecution. And as you can see, a number of countries where Christians are suffering persecution has been increasing since 2014, when Pew Research started to do this research. In 2018, there are actually 145 countries in the world today which have some kind of persecution toward Christians, which is also toward discrimination. So 75%, at least 75% of all religiously motivated violence and oppression is suffered by Christians. So the Christian religion, the Christians are by large the group of people which are being persecuted today. Today, according to ACN research, as we read on this website, almost 340 million Christians around the world, 1 out of 8, live in a country where they suffer some form of persecution, such as arrest, violence, full range of human rights violation, and even murder. ACN is documenting this violation of religious freedom into biannual report, Religious Freedom in the World and Persecuted and Forgotten. So, Ross, this is reporting on Christians worldwide being persecuted. And by the way, I didn't mention this organization. It's also cooperating. It's also some of the data. It's available on their website. One of the known organization, which is also doing not just research but active, trying to help wherever they can, is this organization which you probably heard of, open doors. They're also doing some whatever they can to help Christians which are persecuted. And this is happening in the world today. This is not past, and we're not even talking about the future. It's about Christian persecution. But now let's go to something which for many people maybe comes as a surprise. What about us, Ross? I mean, you and I live in a country where we're not really persecuted as Christian, or
That's
are
right.
we? Because does persecution always mean that we're going to be imprisoned, or are we going to suffer some kind of violence? And I'm thinking about, are there any signs of a worldwide persecution taking place, targeting a certain group of people with a certain belief or preference, or let's call it what it is, a strong belief in our God-given freedom of choice when it also concerns our health, our bodies?
Yeah, well, exactly. We see right now there's a growing assault, if you want to call it that, on freedom of choice when it comes to health, as you say. Um, you know, what came out of Nuremberg after World War II, there was the Nuremberg Code regarding medical experiments. And I'm sure you're aware of this, Michael, how that they decreed that nobody could be forced to take a medical procedure if they choose not to. Now, what we're finding today is an assault on our liberties as human beings in a wide-ranging front. And one of these, of course, is the medical arena. For example, the current rollout of the vaccine, so-called vaccine that we're hearing about, it's actually technically an experimental drug, is in some countries being mandated. In many countries, they're now issuing passports for those who have been vaccinated, have more rights, shall we say, or privileges than those who haven't been vaccinated. Where this is going to go, it's intriguing. But I tell you what, it's really setting the world stage for the mindset of if there's something perceived as for the good of society, those who, for conscious reasons or whatever, resist or do not choose to partake in this experiment are going to be treated as less than full citizens. They won't have all the freedoms that people had. Now, obviously, people, I mean, you can see supposedly why it's a good thing to receive this vaccine, because it's meant to be for the good of society. But the mindset that's being created by this is very worrying indeed. It'll be easy to transfer the same mindset across to something else, like perhaps for the good of the planet, we need to have a day of rest. You know, you can see all sorts of serious implications if it's widely accepted that, yes, a minority who resist what the government says need to have their rights taken away to help persuade them to do what's right for the good of society. Why this is so worrying is because Bible prophecy makes it very clear in Revelation 13, that those who refuse to accept the mark of the beast will have economic boycott against them. It says they won't be able to buy or sell. Now, that's something from prophecy that we know is going to happen. And I don't know about you, Michael, but I can certainly see, and I'm sure you can as well, the trends with the COVID vaccine is setting the stage for that. Now, we're not saying, of course, the vaccine is the mark of the beast, not at all, but we're saying the mindset, the presumption that a small group who refuse to receive something can be treated differently to help persuade them. You know what I mean? It's just, to me, it just shouts, this is a downhill slide into the fulfillment of that prophecy. You know what I'm saying?
Well, you mentioned some very important aspects, Ross. So the transfer of this mindset that we have from the French Revolution, and you already mentioned the term which has been coined, the greater good, or what we also find in different agendas, United Nations the Agenda 21, Agenda 2030, which is called the common good. So this is not a new, let's say, envisioned mindset. This is actually a transfer from the French Revolution, as we're going to see in a few minutes when we're going to delve in a very important aspect that has brought the world and has brought suffering to millions of people since the French Revolution. But we find this idea that for the greater good, some people, some group of people will have to suffer, will have to somehow be persecuted, and the society and the world as such will have not just to accept it, but actually to cooperate in persecuting this group of people, because they will be and they are already against this greater good, this common good. So let's have a look, for the sake of being as factual as possible. Let's have a look at this is just a resume of recently started mainstream, corporate mainstream, and government's campaign against this group of people, which has been coined the pandemic of the unvaccinated. And as this article points out, it's to dehumanize the skeptics. So this is something which is very important for us to understand, and everyone should understand. And this is not a conversation about the vaccines or what kind of vaccine. No, this is a conversation about this mindset which has been rebranded, if I may say today, into another, is just another wording, pandemic of the unvaccinated. And you find it probably in any headlines around the world today. Recently, the campaign started also here in Scandinavia as well. So let's go. I made some highlights on this article. The corporate media has deluged readers and viewers to its newest pandemic of the unvaccinated talking point. And just to one of the talking points, as the highly contagious Delta and so on fuels outbreaks in the United States, the director for Centers for Disease Controls and Prevention warned on Friday that this is becoming a pandemic of the unvaccinated. So this is not just happening by mistake. CNN talking heads, New York Times writers have not adopted this talking point by accident. Through a careful engineered rhetorical sleight of hand, they have subtly introduced the concept that the actual unvaccinated people and not the virus itself are the source of ongoing suffering. And I think this is very important for us to understand, because this kind of dehumanizing, this kind of demonizing campaign is not new, has just been rebranded, as we have seen in the French Revolution. And it is happening right now, today, in our very own country, and it's your country and a lot of other countries, and it is going to happen in the future as well, when this rebranding is going to turn against another group of people, also for the common good. But let's go on with this resume here. Homeland, this is a heavy implication. What does one do with a harmful pathogen? Eliminate it from society, right? Okay, so this new group of people, the unvaccinated, actually has become, in the mind of many people today, probably well-meant people, has becoming the real enemy of society. So if you are one of these people, if you are part of the group of the unvaccinated, you are part of the ongoing suffering of the world today. This is what is being implemented today. And you, if you are part of this group as such, you will be punished. And there is already taking place a lot of legislation which is being implemented around the world, as we're going to see here. For example, United States Homeland Security declares lockdown skeptics potential terrorists, right? So you will be a terrorist if you are a lockdown skeptic and if you go public with your information, your skepticism. This is a link to Homeland Security, where they states that the homeland continues to face a diverse and challenging threat environment. Such threats are also exacerbated by impacts of the ongoing global pandemic, including grievances over public health safety measures and perceived government restriction. Notice MSNBC, this is the corporate mainstream. Of course, they promote unvaccinated NFL players to be treated as second-class citizens, right? They put it on a headline. NBC sport columnist Peter King declares NFL players who refuse the shot will be treated as second-class citizens. CNN, of course, medical analyst Liana Wen, in a similar vein, said last month that it needs to be hard for people to remain unvaccinated. Atlantic, time for no-fly list for unvaccinated. A no-fly list for unvaccinated adults is an obvious step that the federal government should take. UK government, so if you're watching this from United Kingdom, you probably know this. If you're part of this group, they're thinking unvaxxed British citizens no longer should be allowed to leave the country, reports Daily Mail. Okay, so the article goes on to debunk the illusion of vaccine choice. And this is a very interesting quote from Benito Mussolini, which we all know who he was. Fascists should more appropriately be called corporatists because it is a merger of state and corporate power. Well, let me just mention the last highlights which I made here. The COVID shots are voluntary, the governments insist, but if you don't get them, you may soon no longer be allowed to fly on an airplane. Is this already happening, Ross? Yes, it is. Eat in a restaurant, drink in a bar, exercise in a gym, watch a movie in a theater, attend a concert, enroll your kids in a school, attend university, find meaningful employment, and the last but not least, access emergency medical care, shop for food in a grocery store. Get vaxxed or don't eat is not any kind of choice. It's an ultimatum, a gun to the head. Is this something you recognize in your part of the world, Ross?
At this point in time, it hasn't got to that stage just yet, but it's moving that way. I know a friend of mine in a country, I won't name names, around the Mediterranean. Already there, they have guards at supermarket entranceways. You cannot enter unless you've been vaccinated and you can prove it. So already, the last on that list is happening in some countries. You cannot shop. You cannot go grocery shopping unless you've been vaccinated. And I tell you, this is horrific. This is an absolute abuse of human rights, you know. Whenever a country or government becomes, what's the right word, has no concern for human rights, this is where things lead. I mean, this is what was happening in France. Yeah, totalitarian, exactly. This is what was happening in France when they were killing off anything that had any influence of Protestantism in it. That's, you know, when they snuffed out Protestantism. Then when the French Revolution took over, they would kill anybody who didn't agree with the revolution. You know, this is what happened in Germany in World War II. Unless you're going along with the Nazi Party's narrative and their agenda, you're outclassed, you know, you're an enemy of the state. In Russia, China, whenever you're against the communist revolution, you're an enemy of the state. For the good of society, they would say, you know, for the common good, we need to get rid of these anti-revolutionaries, whether it's the French Revolution, Communist Revolution. For the good of the Nazis, for the good of Germany, you had to get rid of, say, the Jews and the Gypsies and so forth during World War II. You know, it's the same narrative, absolute totalitarianism. Unless you go along with the agenda of the state, you become second-class citizen and ultimately get persecuted. It's no different.
So, what is happening in the world today, which we are trying to link to the mindset of the French Revolution, and as you just mentioned, it happened during the French Revolution on a terrible scale. Does it have a future application? Is the creation of this global mindset and the legislative infrastructure that will, at any given time, be able to target and prosecute a certain non-compliant group of people? We've already seen, and by the way, yes, we don't put here the information, but as we speak, it's happening right now in France, here in Europe, where people are not able to go, for example, in one of the largest shopping malls, Carrefour. They're not being allowed to go in and buy groceries, and the number of people which have been demonstrating against this decision by the government is increasing weekend after weekend. So it looks like we might have in the very near future a new modern French Revolution. But is there any future application, Ross? Is this mindset going to repeat itself? Because we already see that the legislation, the legislative infrastructure is already in place. And we have so much information available today. And when we talk about this international cooperation, which has been introducing the so-called vaccine passport.
Well, the same book that we read from earlier speaks in the future about the mark of the beast issue. And what's going to lead into that is going to be natural disasters, which are going to be blamed on, just like in the story of Job in the Bible, blamed on God being angry with people for not keeping Sunday Sabbath. And as a result, there'll be persecution on those who keep the true Sabbath of the fourth commandment. Now, what's happening in the world today is just preparing the mindset of people to think, yes, if there's a group that are not doing what's best for the common good, for the good of society, they need to be dealt with differently. They need to have pressure put on them. They need to have some of their rights taken away to help them, persuade them of the error of their ways. It's just mind-boggling how people are being conditioned through what we're seeing happening today in preparation for what's coming up according to prophecy in Revelation chapter 13. I find it mind-boggling. It's interesting, people being asked after World War II, how could Germans have gone down the track that they did? Why didn't people rise up and protest? And each step of the way with the Nazi takeover of Germany was just a little step, wasn't much resistance, pushed forward hard, a little bit of resistance, get rid of the resistance, keep pushing, and it was step by step, and people didn't see where it would end up. They thought, these are just aberrations. Give a bit of time, we'll go back to normal again. And it's interesting to see so much resistance in France towards what's being pushed. Perhaps their people have seen when their history, their own history, where it's gone. So maybe they're waking up earlier than a lot of people in other countries and saying, we don't want this. We've seen where this has gone before. Whereas in countries like Australia, New Zealand, we've had it good for so long that people aren't seeing where this is trending.
Yeah, and I can only confirm that as a European, probably the most, I would say, probably the French, what I want to say is the French are most likely the people that are going to raise their voices against any tyranny among other nations of Europe. So let's move on to the next parallel. I know there are many other information that we could have brought here. I just wanted to point our viewers to what is happening today and the correlation to the French Revolution. So the parallel number 5 is revolutionary France was a tenth of the spiritual city of Babylon, which the Bible points to be the papacy. She was one of the 10 kingdoms of Western Europe. So if you're a Bible-believing Christian, please do take your Bible and find these Bible verses from Revelation, 2 Timothy chapter 3 and 12, Revelation chapter 12, chapter 16, chapter 18, all these Bible verses which we are not going to read today. But these are the Bible verses that we're going to base our explanation when we're talking about the French Revolution, the past, and we're going to talk about the present time today. So our statement is that the end time will involve the whole world, which will have come under the jurisdiction of spiritual Babylon. Now, Ross, I'd like you to shortly explain this statement, which I just made here on the screen, which is end time events will involve the whole world, which will have come under the jurisdiction of spiritual Babylon. So, who, according to the Bible, Ross, who is spiritual Babylon?
That comes straight out of Revelation 17. Revelation 17 depicts a woman riding a beast, a scarlet-coloured beast. Now, a woman in Bible prophecy represents a church. And you find in Revelation 12, there's a pure woman represented there, and clothed with the sun, the righteousness of Christ. And all through the Bible, God uses a woman as a symbol for his people. Like he spoke to old Israel and said, I'm married to you. You find that in the book of Hosea and many other places. When God speaks in Jeremiah chapter 31 about the new covenant to come, he talks about how he was a husband to old Israel through the first covenant, the covenant at Sinai. So this marriage symbolism where God is the husband and the church or God's people, whether it be the Jews or the New Testament church, are his bride. In Revelation 17, you've got a harlot woman. Obviously, this is a woman who's got into illicit relations, committing adultery. And on her forehead, it has a name written. It says Babylon, mother of harlots. So Babylon is a symbol for the corrupt, shall we say, medieval church, the Church of Rome. And of course, it will be the same title when it once again takes over the world. How do we know it'll take over the world? If you go to Revelation chapter 13, it's there depicted as the beast coming up out of the sea. It receives a deadly wound, and we know that was fulfilled largely due to the French Revolution again. This is where the French Revolution comes in, when Napoleon sent the army down and took the Pope captive because he refused to disband his civil authority. And so the papacy received a deadly wound. No longer was it a kingdom. It retained the church aspect, but it was no longer a civil power in Europe. But the Bible says the deadly wound will be healed, and then all the world, it says, all the world will wonder after the beast. So there's coming a time when the papacy will again arise to its ascendancy and influence that it had during the Dark Ages when it ruled Europe. It's going to happen again. And what happened to a tenth of that old Roman Empire in France is going to happen to the whole world.
Yes.
There we are. We see the slide you've got there, yes.
To summarize what you just said here, this is some bullet points. 10 horns of Daniel. This is Bible telling us, Revelation 13, 10 toes of Daniel to represent kingdoms of Western Europe, including revolutionary France, which was inherited by Papal Rome. 1798, the French people arose in an awful revenge against the arrogant, corrupt, cruel, selfish aristocracy and the priesthood that had ground them down in poverty and serfdom for so many years. This is a statement from the book An Enduring Vision. The time of the 18th century's French Revolution, when the 1260 years of the papal era were closing, was a turning point in the history of modern era. It brought forth forces that made a permanent change in the thoughts and action of mankind, from the book The Prophetic Faith of Our Father. The French people did not distinguish false Christianity from true faith, and during the Reign of Terror attacked everything associated with religion, officially abolishing all religion. Every church was cold, Bibles were publicly burned, most of the clergy were executed, and the worship of the goddess of reason was exalted and given homage. For 3.5 years, the revolutionaries of France did everything to destroy the Bible. They abolished the 7-day week because it originated at creation, as recorded in the book of Genesis. They decreed a 10-day week, which ended in reviling and blasphemy. During the revolution, there was a widespread moral debasement and corruption. The union of marriage was reduced to a mere civil transient contract between any two people that could be freely engaged in and cast off at pleasure. It was described as the sacrament of adultery. So actually, Ross, all these aspects we have covered today. I mean, it's overwhelming to see that these aspects, not just of society and religion, socio-politic, these mindsets, these environments that have been introduced during the French Revolution, we see them well and alive today, even amplified today. Take this one here: moral debasement, spread of corruption, the union of marriage. We live in a country here, many people in Europe, even among Christians, even among Seventh-day Adventists, they do not see the union of marriage as something important. So this is coming, we see, from the French Revolution. It's just a civil transient contract between any two people. And this is what it led to what we see today: debasement, sacrament of adultery. But these are some of the aspects which we find in the French Revolution. We find them today. That was the history and what brought us today. So back to the present application. What kind of involvement, if we take that, with spiritual Babylon are we talking about here? Because there are different aspects. We have the political, we have the religious involvement, we have the economic involvement. Does it affect or require losing our freedoms? People should ask, if I'm going to get involved with some kind of entity, which I'm going to give my rights away for the benefit of safety, what kind of freedoms am I going to lose, and am I going to get back these freedoms? If I join any movement, if I join any corporation, what is it going to be the consequences? These are the questions. Are we looking at a merger of religions? And I want to bring our viewers to the ecumenical movement. What about the ecumenical movement? So let us walk our viewers, Ross, through a short journey of involvement with spiritual Babylon, which we have already defined according to the Bible. And this is going to be from a Christian perspective. As I mentioned, there is also the political, secular, and financial perspective, which we will not cover in this presentation. Now, there is this website, which is called The Season of Creation, reveals that Rome entered into a climate change covenant with the ecumenical patriarch Bartholomew and his Orthodox Church. He had started advocating for the climate change movement back in 1989. Later, liberal Protestant denominations such as Episcopalians, Lutherans, and Methodists have joined the Green Agenda. The World Council of Churches was instrumental in making the special time a season, extending the celebration from 1st September to 4th of September. We read this here. This is a quotation from this website. The next slide here, it's coming from a similar pagan actually focus to Laudato Si, which we have learned. The ecumenical scope of Pope Francis' climate change agenda. This ecumenical group goes beyond solely worshipping creation, as you can see here. We pray in thanksgiving for Mother Earth, in whom all life is rooted, Brother Sun, whose energy radiates life, Sister Water, who nurtures and revives us, and so forth. Okay? So, Ross, just by mentioning few of these aspects, spiritual Babylon, how much involvement do we see today, and where is this involvement going to lead the world to, according to the Bible?
Well, if we take Babylon as being the prime application of that is the papacy, and we know from prophecy that all the world is going to wander after this power, we're going to see a revival of people looking to the papacy for moral guidance. It's interesting looking at all those signs we're looking at before about the way there's no morals, or during the French Revolution there was no morals, there was atheism, there was godlessness, there was horrible extremes. When the United States was founded in the late 18th century, about the time of the French Revolution, and they put in their constitution that the government will make no law regarding the establishment or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Now, some people, commentators, particularly Roman Catholic commentators, said this will never work. You can't have a society that is not controlled by a church. It'll have no morals. It'll fall apart. But you know what? America flourished because it had religious liberty, and people were able to practice their religion freely. And as a result, it was a free and happy society. The country flourished. It's grown to become the most powerful nation in the world. But if you have a lot of godless influences coming in, Hollywood, immoral things, pornography, whatever, it will destroy the morals in a country. And of course, the church will say, you see, we needed to have enforced morality. We need to have the church controlling society to stop this downhill trend.
Right.
And we see more and more the influences through the media, through whatever, trying to destroy the morals, destroy the family, for example, destroying the meaning of marriage. Marriage used to be between one man and one woman, and that was the basis of the family. What do we see today? We see gay marriages. We see what's called civil unions, where they can both be the same sex. And this is breaking down society. And this might sound shocking, but I believe this is being fostered by the papacy in a very subtle, roundabout way, not openly, because in their eyes, it's proving, hey, we need to have enforced morality. We are the church. We should be in control to stop this downward trend. It's subtle. It's how the devil plays the Punch and Judy show. The devil's got both hands. The opposition. The devil plays one party to create a situation so the society falls into the hands of the other, and this devil's controlling both of them. Do you know what I mean? The devil will be behind the downward morals because he wants the reaction to say,
Hegelian dialectic. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And that's what we're seeing exactly here. So we saw that in France in the French Revolution. Sorry, just to finish. They went into such horrific lack of morality, they had to swing back the other way, say we need some strong leadership to bring law and order back, and that was the environment where someone like Napoleon could get into power, because they needed strong leadership. It's interesting how Satan will swing society one way to swing it back the other. So
back to the present. back to the present day application, because we're talking about the past history, and we're going to see a rise of the spiritual Babylon today and its relationship between the spiritual Babylon and the world on every thinkable facet of society today. I would say it's tremendously obvious. One has to live under the
Mm.
rock not to see this happening today. And I believe and I
Yeah.
hope that no one is in doubt, unless again one is deciding to be blind by choice, that the Vatican, the Catholic Church, is the largest corporation and business today in the world. This report
Mm.
that we find on the same webpage, Season for Creation, this is just a short summary, headline: advocacy, participate in campaigns, call for restoration, calls for activists for wealth redistribution, aggressive national emission targets, loyalty to United Nations enforced conservation, national bans on plastic and fossil fuels. We advocate for just climate finance, call for debt jubilee. All nations must adopt ambitious national targets to reduce emissions. Richer countries must scale up grants in developing countries. We support the United Nations call to safeguard 30% of Earth as protected habitat by 2030. We commit to a rapid reduction in a single-use plastic. We support the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals at a local and international levels. Endorsement of the fossil fuel divestment campaign to boycott fossil fuel companies. This is obviously what the spiritual Babylon, the papacy, which has turned into the most powerful entity in the world today. And friends, this is not us just making mere opinions of what we think is happening in the world today. These are facts. Everybody should be able to see what is happening today if you would like to give yourself time to understand what is happening today in the world. So Ross, let's move on. If you don't have any other comments on this, let's move on to the next parallel, number 6, which will be the last one that we're going to cover in this presentation. And the parallel goes like this, that there was a centralizing of wealth and power in the church and state. They united in order to protect each other. I mean, this is very obvious of what happened then during the Dark Ages. And we have some quotation here. Let's take the Bible first of all. Revelation 18, verse 3, the kings of the earth, that's the rulers, have committed fornication, which has been illicitly united with her, Babylon, spiritual Babylon, papacy, and the merchants of the earth, that's the multinational corporation, and other major corporations have become rich through the abundance of her luxury. The same chapter forecasts how the world financial establishment will be ruined through Babylon's fall, which is also being prophesied in chapter 18 of Revelation, verse 2, 3, 9, 11, and 15. Today, Avram Manhattan, a very well-known writer from Vatican, the Vatican Billions, his very interesting book, The Vatican Billions, wrote that today the vast multinational enterprises are seriously influencing the economies of the world, even in socialist countries, and entwined through all the multinationals and influencing them is the greatest multinational of all, the Vatican. Ellen G. White writes in her book Education, page 2028, the vast combination for the enriching of the few at the expense of the many. Ross, we don't even really have to go into what is happening in the world today. I believe that everyone should be aware that this is exactly what is happening today, isn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely. We're finding gigantic monopolies being formed. you'll find a few companies will control one particular area, aspect of life, whether it be supermarkets or oil companies or whatever, and they will squeeze out or buy out the small players. They will fight to get control. You might have duopolies, you might have heard of, where two companies control the entire market in certain lines of business. We see this over and over and over. And so, absolutely, you can see how Revelation is going to be fulfilled. The merchants of the earth are basically in bed with the papacy, and the governments of the world. They're all together to basically extract maximum profit from people. It's terrible.
Right. Now, it is a matter of factual history that the French Revolution was a monstrous horror. In the name of so-called, which is being hailed today, liberty, equality, fraternity, or death. That was actually the motto of the French Revolution. We know today that over 40,000 people lost their heads to the guillotine, and 300,000 people were publicly executed by firing squads, drownings, and other methods of mass murder, and ultimately many millions died in the 25 years of war and upheavals that resulted. I'm aware that this is not what history books are telling you today, or what some politicians would like the French Revolution to have been or to look like, but the reality was actually this. The prototype revolution. Let's have a look at the political aspect which is influencing our world today. Because the French Revolution was a prototype, has been the inspiration and model for all socialist and communist revolution in modern history. That's a known fact. Lord Acton, in his lectures on the French Revolution, observed that the appealing thing in the French Revolution is not a tumult, but a design. Through all the fire and smoke, we perceive the evidence of calculating organization. The managers remain studiously concealed and masked, but there is no doubt about their presence from the first. Now, many people today, Ross, are hailing socialism, but maybe, or they do, does not even understand or are interested to learn the roots of socialism, which is a modern disguise of communism. So let's have a look at some of the tools that were used during the revolution. Disinformation, propaganda, subversion of language, malice, envy, hatred, jealousy, mass murder, foreign military intervention as a diversion to distract the masses from the failure of government. You mentioned before Afghanistan, the war in Afghanistan of the United States. These still have been implemented by more modern revolutionaries. And we have the communist one here. Ideas, the revolutionary ideas, the power mad and disenchanted have continued to sing the praises of the French Revolution and to attempt to replicate its ideals in revolution. We have the history telling us demonic forces and the Enlightenment ideas of humanist philosophers such as Jean-Jacques Rousseau and Voltaire prepared the ground for revolution. Historian Otto Scott observed that the French intellectual middle and upper classes had grown ashamed of their country, history, and institution. Such a phenomenon had never before arisen in any nation or race throughout the long history of mankind. A great loosening began. The country slowly came apart. For the first time since the decadent days of Rome, pornography emerged from its caves and circulated openly in a civilized nation. The Catholic Church in France was intellectually gutted. The priests lost their faith along with the congregations. Strange cults appeared: sex rituals, black magic, Satanism. Perversion became not only acceptable but fashionable. Homosexual held public balls to which heterosexuals were invited, and the police guarded their carriages. The air grew thick with plans to restructure and reconstruct all traditional French society and institutions. And the last one here, which I find very important, comes also from the same historian Arthur Scott. The heirs, the role of the news media, the mass media, the mainstream. The heirs of the Enlightenment of the late 18th century launched the first revolution in all history against the ideas of Christianity and Christianity's God. The press was spearheaded, font and fuel for these discussions. The journals were mixtures of politics and smut. They admired agitators extravagantly and never discussed the church without mention of scandal, nor the government without criticism. They relied heavily on tales of sin in high places and high-handed outrages of the court. No name, however highly placed and illustrious, escaped. Through its journals and pamphlets, it could distort, color, plead, argue, lie, report, and misreport the information upon which the balance of the realm depended. This is what happened during the French Revolution, Ross. What about
In
today?
other words, the media had a huge role to play because it changed, it influenced the way the population thought. And do we see that today? The mainstream media is a phrase that's become almost synonymous with, I don't know, a counterculture. You know, you've got basically the mainstream media versus social media. You know, we are in such a setup for a repeat of the French Revolution. It's unbelievable. I mean, it's frightening. If we didn't know from prophecy that God is going to win in the end, we'd think we're in for a big war. This is going to be revolution globally, and that's what prophecy predicts. The stage is set for this, absolutely.
So many people that are looking at mainstream media as the source of truth has been induced, has been manipulated by the mainstream propaganda to actually implement a similar mindset as the French Revolution. And we see today that the mainstream media, when we're talking about, let's say, the communists today, the focus is being, of course, on still communist countries such as China and maybe Cuba and North Korea. But the communism and the fascism that we actually are seeing being implemented into our Western societies today are not at all being seen, I would say, by the majority. So let's have a look at this short video clip, which I'm going to interrupt which has been made to describe how the communists started actually during the French Revolution.
Communism is a belief in the destruction of belief. It destroys religion wherever it goes, and yet it functions like a religion, or rather, an evil cult. Let's see. Now, in communism, there are leaders who act as prophets. There's scripture. There are followers, fanatics, precepts, and rules, requirements for faith in the party, and there's punishment for non-believers. The cult of communism lures people by preaching secular salvation and a man-made utopia, and this leads to dystopias. So who is the unholy father of communism? Marx? while he popularized it and sharpened it, but the origins go back further. François Noël Gracchus Babeuf. Babeuf believed in the elimination of money. He's also regarded as the first revolutionary communist. In his imagined system, people would hand over their work to a common storehouse owned by an all-powerful government, which would then redistribute it back to the people. Babeuf launched the Conspiracy of Equals after the failures of the French Revolution. It was a blueprint for violent revolution against the French government. The plot failed. Babeuf was arrested and beheaded in 1797. But one of his conspirators who survived was Philippe Buonarroti. Philippe created the League of Outlaws, which was built on Babeuf's ideas. Then came Wilhelm Weitling, a German tailor who took Babeuf's ideas, added in some of his own Christian apocalypse vision into the mix, and renamed the League of Outlaws to the League of the Just. In the 1700s and 1800s, secret societies were on the rise, with many of them popping up across Europe. The League of the Just would eventually merge under the Blanquist Rebellion. However, the Blanquist Rebellion failed in 1839, so the League of the Just again renamed itself, this time as the Educational Society for German Working Men in 1840. At a Congress in June 1847, the League of the Just joined under the Communist Correspondence Committee, which was formed a year earlier by Marx and Engels. The manifesto would be published 1 year after, and regarded as scripture by future communist leaders, who all had insatiable bloodlust. These movements culminated in the Paris Commune of 1871, regarded as the first communist government. In just over 2 months, they would kill tens of thousands and destroy roughly a quarter of Paris's arts and cultural relics. But their work would still be far from over. France and America were both suffering under tyrannies in the late 1700s. The American Revolution fought against imperial rule to create a system that limited the power of government with a 3-branch system. The Americans fought for the idea that government is instituted among men only to protect the inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. They expanded liberties in one nation under God. The French Revolution, however, replaced absolute imperial rule with absolute rule in a socialized system. It stripped personal liberties with one nation under a state cult. The French Revolution would be remembered for its unjust bloodshed, killing over 300,000 people. It was a period known as the Reign of Terror. When Babeuf was alive, he was a member of the Jacobins Club, a revolutionary society in France at the time. In this club also was the infamous Maximilien Robespierre, lover of the guillotine and public executions. Before the Jacobins took power, they were divided between the moderate Girondins and the radical Montagnards. Robespierre led the radicals, and once he attained power in 1793, the first people he beheaded were the Girondins. One of the radical Jacobins, Louis-Antoine de Saint-Just, justified this as, "You can hope for no prosperity as long as the last enemy of liberty breathes. You have to punish not only the traitors, but even those who are neutral." So unless you are a devout follower of the socialized system, you'll be branded a heretic and hunted down and killed in cult fashion. This happened under the official atheist state cult, the Cult of Reason, which purged religious believers under the de-Christianization movement. The Jacobins also legally purged people under the law of suspects, which made guilty anyone acting suspiciously, associating with the wrong people, or saying or writing anything considered out of line. With that law alone, they beheaded over 16,000 people. But they weren't finished. The leaders of the French Revolution used utopia to justify violence and labeled swaths of society as enemies of the revolution, and each new law identified a new set of enemies. The famous essayist G.K. Chesterton once said that the new socialist systems are not rebelling against an abnormal tyranny. They're rebelling against what they think is a normal tyranny, the tyranny of the normal. They are not in revolt against the king, he wrote. They're in revolt against the citizen. What motivated these movements was a new belief, deeply rooted in naturism and Gnosticism, which was reason over faith and man over God. Their belief in unrestrained human nature, rather than moral aspirations, mirrored the materialist ideologies that communism would later adopt. It was the idea that if nature takes precedence, anything that springs from human nature is then correct, including any crime and any sin. When people sign up for communism, they think they're signing up to create a system for the people. Instead, the system destroys the people. Time and time again, whenever it's fallen, communism simply gets back up, puts on another mask, renames itself, and tries to con people again, using the idea of the greater good.
The idea of the greater good that we find transformed into the modern communism. And as we know, Ross, one of the main political goals in the communism is actually ownership. Who owns, the goods? Private ownership is actually, as we know, shunned in communism. And do we see that today? Well, by the way, if you haven't seen this before, which you probably have, the World Economic Forum announced on June 29 this year. I'm trying to get here the article. Let me see if I can get it in a second. They announced that it will initiate a new public-private partnership with big tech and governments around the world to identify and uproot all opinions from internet that it considers harmful. This actually makes me think about what happened during the French Revolution, because during the French Revolution, I have the data here on the screen. If I can get it, here it comes. During the French Revolution, we had this Committee of Public Safety and the Reign of Terror. This website here, Britannica.com, it's actually doing an explanation what they actually did, suppressing, censoring everybody else that went against their narrative. This is what we see today. It's happening. Global Coalition for Digital Safety. This is World Economic Forum, and it's actually being implemented, friends, as we speak, in different countries around the world through United Nations. Different governments are taking this legislation to so-called uproot all opinions from the internet that it considers harmful. This was also, and as we know, on the communist agenda. Well, as we know, the WEF, the World Economic Forum, is one of those elitist organizations that wields enormous influence over the elected leaders of Western nations, but which almost nobody in general population has heard of. Its members are international corporate honchos, technocrats who meet once a year in Davos with the stated goal, at least publicly official, of working to shape global, regional, and in the industry agenda. Well, it made a big splash last year during the pandemic when they touted the Great Reset, which promised to use the pandemic as an opportunity, as we see here, to crash the world's dollar-based capitalist economic system and build back better under a more socialist and globally integrated system that mirrors the United Nations 2030 agenda for sustainable development. Now, any politician you hear using the term build back better, Biden, Harris, Trudeau, Johnson, whoever, repeat this mantra daily, you know now at least that they have drunk the poisonous Kool-Aid of the World Economic Forum and its founder, Klaus Schwab. So again, I could not help but think of the Committee of Public Safety that conducted the reign of terror during the French Revolution. I hope now that we're going to finish this presentation, and I'd like you to read the next quotation, Ross, that comes from the book Education, Ellen G. White, and explain it to us. Is this something, do we see this happening in the world today? Is this a prophecy to be fulfilled, or is it in the process of being fulfilled?
This is a very, very significant quote, and we are seeing the stage being set for the fulfillment of this quote. I'll read it. It is such a significant quote from the book Education, page 228. It says, at the same time, anarchy is seeking to sweep away all law, not only divine, but human. The centralizing of wealth and power, the vast combinations for the enriching of the few at the expense of the many, the combinations of the poorer classes for the defense of their interests and claims, the spirit of unrest, of riot and bloodshed, the worldwide dissemination of the same teachings that led to the French Revolution, all are tending to involve the whole world in a struggle similar to that which convulsed France. That is an amazing statement. It just brings out so many pertinent points. We see that there is a real spirit of anarchy in the world today. People are sick of governments and their abuse of their power. So they want to say, we don't want any restraint. It talks about the combinations for the enriching of the few at the expense of the many. We talked earlier about these giant corporations that are taking over the world. In all lines of business, there's mega corporations that control those areas. It talks about the combinations of the poorer classes for the defense of their interests. You get a reaction against the giant corporations in the trade union movement, where workers get together to fight for their rights and for better pay. It talks about the worldwide dissemination of the same teachings that convulsed France. We see atheism as the religion of the education system in Western nations. The evolutionary paradigm is taught in universities. It's not a biblical creation-based one. So it's basically doing away with God right from the beginning of people's education. And so the whole world is ripe for a revolution, similar to what convulsed France, but it's going to involve the whole world. So that is so significant, such an amazing prophecy that. And so that's the whole thrust of what we're talking about. The French Revolution was a model or type for what is going to convulse the world.
Right.
And why does Satan want that? Because out of the chaos of a revolution like that, he can bring what he wants, which we know from Revelation 13 will be worldwide oppressive religious laws enforcing Sunday observance. That's the end result of what we're going to see. So if Satan can get to that goal by having chaos and carnage and bloodshed and revolution in society, he'll do it, and he's going to, because he knows where he wants to go with all of this. He wants to get God's people oppressed, killed off again like he had during the Dark Ages, and he wants his fake religion of Catholicism, the world religion. That's what he wants. And Michael, you and I are living on the verge of that. We're going to see that happen, I believe, in our lifetime very soon.
Definitely, and I thank you, Ross, for your comments and taking part of the second part. And we hope that you that are going to and are watching this presentation, and you're not going to see this presentation as just mere entertainment, just some news that you're going to see, but you're going to realize that there is something you need to do. Because these parallels that we have presented so far in these two parts to presentation, we strongly believe there is no other option. This is the most probable course that our world, this planet, which you also live on, is going to pursue, and how it will climax in the return of Christ. What other options do you have? Well, there is the world option today. There is the World Economic Forum agenda that you can follow, but you are forced to follow that agenda. And there is this option which we are trying to present to you. So thank you, Ross. Thank you, everyone, for watching and for following. We'll see you next time on the next third part of this presentation, where we're going to cover the next parallels in between the French Revolution and our time today, and how all of this is going to end in the world today. Thank you, Ross.
Thank you, Michael.
Du rede, eller lever du som hustruen til Lot? Har du glæde ved din rigdom? Har du klæder, hus og godser, har det godt? Har du glemt, at Jesus kom til denne jord på grund af dig og mig? At han gav sit liv på korset for at tage din synd på sig. Jesus kommer, er du rede til at se ham, når han kommer på sin sky? Har du givet alt til Jesus? Har han renset hjertet? Er du født på ny? Mon du ved, at selv den værste synder kan han gøre mere end ren. Vil du renses helt af Jesus? Han kan rense hver og en. Tænk, hvis verden elskede Jesus, og den kendte gaven i, at Jesus led, da han gav sit liv på korset, for at du kan få hans retfærd og hans fred. Tænk, hvis verden kunne forstå, at livet flyder fra hans hænder sår, og i livet uden Jesus farer alle vild som får. Jesus kommer, er du rede? Er dit hjerte fyldt af himmels kærlighed, fyldt af mildhed og af glæde, fyldt af godhed, fred og dyb taknemmelighed? Mon du ved, at kærligheden kun kan vækkes gennem kærlighed, og at Jesus på sin trone opgav alt og kom herned. Tænk, at himlen gav os Jesus som den bedste gave himlen kunne give. Når du angrer dine synder, er du mere rig end rimen de kan blive. Mon du ved, at penge ikke tager dig nærmere til himlens port, men for de ting, som du har gjort. Tænk, at jorden, den fik Jesus som en kvist i et rodskud af den tørre jord. Kendt med sygdom, gjort elendig, selvom han var verdens lys og livets sår. Har du glemt, at Jesus han blev såret for at give dig lægedom, og at han blev agtet ringe, så at du kan vende om. Det er godt at kende Jesus, godt at vide, at man har en bedste ven. Midt i sorgen er han med os. Når vi falder, rejser han os op igen. Har du glemt, at Jesus hænder stadig såres dybt af dig og mig, når vi hellere vælger synden, end at gå på livets vej. Jesus kommer, er du rede? Hør hans stemme kalder, lyd hans røst i dag. Der er stadig plads i arken. Jesus siger, at frelsens dag den er i dag. Mon du vil, når nådens dør bliver lukket, kan den ikke åbnes mere. Jesus kommer, er du rede til at se ham som han er? Mon du vil, når nådens dør bliver lukket, kan den ikke åbnes mere. Jesus kommer, er du rede til at se ham som han er? Jesus kommer, er du rede til at se